welcome to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe, with me, Tom Sherrington, and normally my partner, Emma Turner, but she hopefully will join later or not, we'll find out. The truth is, I don't know where she is. I'm just really honest about it. So this is the way that the world goes. She's obviously got something's held her up. But we have two fantastic guests. I'm really excited about this. The one and only Meg Lee. So Meg, hello, welcome to Mind the Gap.
Hi, Tom. So excited to be with you.
That was brilliant. And Jim here. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Tom. Lovely to be here and looking forward to a good old chat.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. You can explain this to the audience when we ask you in a minute. But I mean, I could have invited you on separately because you both do. I know you for different reasons. So Meg, I know you because we've worked with you when you were working in Frederick County Public Schools in Maryland, partly because you were the host of Research Ed and organized Research Ed USA, but also we did some work with the school district where you were working. And Jim, because of your work, you know, publishing books like this book that you've written with Paul Kirshner and Carl Hendrick, and this one, How Teaching Happens, and the new one on instructional illusion. So you've got your own thing separately, but also you are a unit together. And that's the reason why you're on together, because you've created a new entity. So rather than me risk misrepresenting, why don't you explain to people, if I ask Meg to start, like what's your kind of current work? What are you up to? And so people know a bit about what your kind of interest is in this whole space.
Thanks, Tom. It's really it's exciting that I recently stepped away from 30 years in public education in the U.S., where I had a variety of different roles. Certainly teacher, professional learning leader, school leader, system leader, executive leader. And I loved that work, and it was really important to me, particularly the infusion of learning science over the past 10 years into Frederick County Public Schools. But I was really starting to see that there was a space for this work to generate beyond Frederick and beyond even the state of Maryland. And I guess about 3 years ago, I was sort of on the lookout for what might be the next level of the work. Not thinking I'd be leaving Frederick, but just thinking about where would the work be going. And that's when I met Jim. And I was like, okay, this is somebody who shares my vision, my values, and I think understands how leadership and instruction work together to really move systems at scale. So our challenge in the United States with evidence-informed practice is huge systems. And so Jim and I have teamed up to support school systems, education prep programs in higher ed, and organizations across the board that want to be more evidence-informed, particularly to do this work over time at scale. And there's nobody I would rather work with than Jim Heal. I say all the time, he is the person who I believe does a phenomenal job of taking complex theory and helping it be something that teachers can hold and use and apply. And he can also speak that language to leaders. And so it is a joy every day to do this work with Jim.
A big vote of confidence for your new partner. So what's your perspective? Yeah. Tell people about your background and what you're now doing.
Yeah, so I had started, obviously, as you can imagine, in the UK, and I was a classroom teacher and an administrator there, as they call it over here in the US, for about a decade. And then when I moved to the US, I think I started to attend to something that I had been aware of and frustrated by, but which I couldn't really put my finger on, which was that how are teachers making decisions, and what is the burden of not having a navigating principle by which you can make better decisions more of the time. And so when I moved to the US, I was able to really lean into that more fully. I've lived in the US for 10 years now. And that came in the form of pursuing my doctoral work here in the US. And then from there, I worked at Research Schools International, which sort of pushed into schools in different parts. And then the last role I was engaged in was at Deans for Impact. And that really was, in a sense, mirroring what Meg just described that she was trying to do within Frederick County Public Schools. But in a sense, this was a national non-profit that was pushing into a whole range of different contexts, particularly within educator preparation and higher ed here in the US. And so the kind of origin story of how Meg and I first started to work together was that we came up with this notion that why is a district that is continually professionally developing leaders and teachers not working alongside the other folks who do this work, which is within a teacher preparation itself. And it seemed to us that never the twain shall meet. And so we created a consortium that allowed those constituents to come and work together. And it was at that point that we realized, well, actually, I think we might be onto something here. And the idea that you could invite those kinds of people around the same table at the same time, build shared understanding of the science of learning, understand how to apply it to their classrooms. And then, as Meg said, ultimately, how do you move these huge systems in the direction of that becoming not just a happenstance, but by design and in a systematized way? So as Meg said, I mean, I'm not just saying this to return the compliment, but I don't think there would be learning science as we currently understand it in the United States if it wasn't for Meg. I think she has set the tone for the fact that this is possible and it can add value, and we can lean into these things, even though they might seem daunting and complex at first. They can make a difference, and she's shown just how.
So it's interesting. So you work in a very specific context, and my experience with the US has been, I mean, it's so for example, I just come from Australia, and there, it's in terms of area, it's a big country, but it's kind of, you go to Perth or Melbourne and Sydney, they're kind of similar, and they've got quite big state things, but then there's a bit of overall control curriculum wise. There's a sense of collaboration at scale, which is kind of already there, and it's things can move. In the US, you just have this thing of it almost being so big, no one knows quite how to deal with it. Like each district has its own governance, 13,000 districts or something. And it just feels so unwieldy and so messy that how movements and systems. So it has this sort of, and then there are people like Zach Groschel, who's a US teacher, banging on about this constant, like his Twitter feed is this sort of flow of exasperation, kind of, why do people still think this, and so whereas from your point of view, Meg, when you got into this, what was your gateway? How did you kind of get a handle on the fact that there were this thing, like you call it learning science, that was the solution to some of the issues you're seeing in the school? What was your way to kind of realize that this is something that schools should be doing?
I think I had always had a particular interest in exceptional education, Tom. So I served at the district level working with students with special educational needs for a while. I worked with students who were gifted and talented and very, very high achievers for a while. And then when I was in school leadership, I was working in a school that needed some restructuring because of student achievement. And so I was constantly thinking about, particularly for students who have been traditionally underrepresented or marginalized in our education system, what are the things that are really going to move the needle? And I kept coming back to instruction, that it wasn't about just kids feeling safe in school or showing up at school. And it wasn't that teachers weren't all working hard. It's that there was something instructionally that was missing fundamentally. And so as I started sort of doing my reading and research and, writing as well, I really sort of found myself in this space, and the guidance of many people in the United States has been valuable, but I have also realized that we needed to follow where the work was moving faster, and that was clearly in the UK and Europe. And so spending a lot of time thinking about that, making connections there with people like you and others was very influential over the decade that I was doing the work in Frederick. And I think you're right that the United States is somewhat of a Wild West when it comes to districts, because each state has its own governance and its own curriculum and its own assessment plans and policies, and we don't have that cohesive American vision of what education should be. I think, though, that while that is a daunting challenge, it also presents some opportunities for us. And it's one that Jim and I are seeing right now, because I am extremely proud to say that Maryland is the first state in the United States to actually write foundational understanding of learning science into the law for every teacher. And so Maryland districts right now have to think about, how do we onboard people with that foundational knowledge right now, and how do we plan for the sustainability of that moving forward as others join our district? And I believe that Maryland is the first state to start that movement, but not the last. I think there is interest that Jim and I are already seeing in other parts of the country. And I think that's how we will develop momentum to move forward. And I do think we do have some advantages in terms of professional development and professional learning that some of our smaller cousins in the UK and Europe don't have in terms of volume. And so we can make some moves at scale and do some things in ways that might be different but effective.
That's fantastic. So what are you seeing? So you say before we got started that since you just started your new enterprise, learning science partners, it's great.
Yes.
It does what it says on the tin, But so Jim, what sorts of interest are you getting then? So you've got this offer, and there's I guess there are not that many other people doing it, but what sorts of things are you then being asked to do for districts or for schools, or is it more scale or individual schools? What sorts of things are you doing?
Yeah, so I mean, one way to think about that is to couch it within this idea of how change happens in the US. And as Meg was saying, sometimes it can feel like you're trying to sort of break a boulder, with a very small hammer. But slowly and surely, when you do get to these tipping points, and one of them is the one that Meg just described, which is this idea that at the state level, if it became mandated that you would need to be able to train teachers to know and be able to apply these principles, suddenly you see a shaft of light, and there can be a kind of tumble effect and a momentum building effect. So once that happened, we were then in a position to be able to offer our understanding, our expertise in what this looks like, almost in a way that it had been waiting for that dam to break. And once it does, you see this flood of interest. So to give you an idea, as you said, the gestation of this organization that we formed has been happening for a while now, but really we've only been serving districts in earnest since January of this year. And we did a little tally the other day just to try and sort of remind ourselves of why we're doing the work. And in this sort of January to September window, because of this accelerated interest, we're already at a level of districts and schools and students and teachers that the work that we're doing is implicated and hopefully will serve and support over 500,000 students in the United States.
Wow, it's amazing.
Which is an astonishing thing to be able to say, right? Which is that it's this idea that they may be a little slower on the uptake, and it may be that the penny takes a little bit longer to drop. But once there is a concerted interest, you see this huge flood and acceleration. And as Meg says, we think that there are other states now peering over the fence and saying, hang on, I think they might be onto something. In terms of the nature of the work that we do, it really has sort of run the gamut from individual training days that, I'll be honest, Meg and I don't consider as beneficial, but rather just a gateway into understanding these principles. What we really want to be able to push towards is deep and durable work, because we know that, as Meg would say, Meg's this better than anyone, it took 10 years for Meg to get to a stage where she could reliably say that learning science was in the bloodstream of Frederick. Say, at least 1 year committed, ideally 2 or even 3 years committed. And what we do over that time is we're able to kind of do 3 main things. One is to build a baseline understanding. There are so many varying and competing definitions of what we mean when we say evidence-informed practice or learning science-driven practitioners. So we have to norm our terms. Otherwise, you land in a kind of Tower of Babel effect of everyone thinks they're talking about the same thing. So once we sort of built that foundation and everyone, to a certain extent is operating from the same song sheet, you then have to deepen that work. So you then say to yourselves, well, how does this live within what you do in the day to day? How can you use it not as an initiative? We often find ourselves saying learning science is not an initiative. It's a lens through which you see everything you do.
Yeah.
And then once you can start to see it, it's hard to unsee it. It's hard to walk into a classroom either as an observer or as a teacher and not start to see how some of these principles of the mind play out. And then in a sense, the third leg of the stool is really to sustain. And so this is this idea of you get it, you can understand it in a number of different ways. And then how do you systematize it? What are the common practices, procedures, habits that the particular context engages in? And how can you latch on to those existing systems such that it becomes part of what we do around here? The last thing that you can ever do is go into a system. There's one system that we work with directly and will do for the next few years that has like over 30,000 teachers. They're not going to suddenly rip up their rule book and start afresh. So we use this language of infusion for a reason. Like, what are the means by which things are already being done, but how can you of the schema or mental model, whatever we might call it, of what good instruction looks like. And then you kind of use the existing context as a sort of delivery system for that way of thinking about it. Really, at this scale, there's no other way to do it than that.
It's hard, isn't it? Because you've got, I mean, I'm just thinking there's so many things that you're dealing with. It's so fascinating. So, I mean, it echoes some of the work that I do as well, but it's sort of, so for example, I'm just thinking as a, for instance, so we've got a big project with a group of schools in Melbourne. And, we've got sort of training a high level group of people who are like coaches, but not so they can be coaches, but so they can train more coaches, because you've got to get enough people, and but also training in the schools themselves directly. So some of it is going direct to the teachers, then the leaders, and then there's operational things about how you get people in the same room or how you reach them, and dissemination. Plus, there's existing cultures between schools, subcultures within schools, and a kind of the whole thing of coherence around the message, that you tell a group of people who are present, but then they have to cascade it out. It's also, there's so many things that have to go well for that all to kind of land nicely in a teacher's head, thinking how to teach better. So you have to sort of operate on lots of fronts, and again, a long-term thing. So what sorts of challenges have you experienced then in doing this? Meg, when you've gone into work with people, what sorts of things are they saying to you, are those obstacles which you then have to sort of help them overcome?
Well, I think you articulated really well, Tom, in that example that there's so many layers to the work. And I would argue there's even an additional one, which is even more meta than that, which is, how do these principles live and sustain and thrive in the ether of the organization itself, which really has to do with what kinds of strategic decisions is the district making, not just about professional learning, but about curriculum adoption and policy and where they're putting emphasis. And so that's why our work is, yes, we want to get these principles in the hands of teachers so that they can quickly use them. But we also know that it isn't just about training teachers or training principals or assistant principals or curriculum leaders. It's also about helping those folks at the executive level who may not have any idea what we're talking about, but we need to bring them on board as well. Because they're the ones who have the power over the commodities that make the difference, which in many cases isn't even financial, it's time, right? Their most valuable commodity is time. How do they make time for teachers to dive into these principles and learn about them? How do they create space for teachers to start doing things that might be more informed by evidence and stop doing things that are not? And that requires all of those levels to interact together. I think the biggest challenge we've seen so far is that this is not quick work. And one of the things that is sort of a reflex in the US is this idea that if something is good, we need to jump on it and do it quickly, and then it will show results quickly, and then we will be able to move from this to the next thing. And I kind of am not apologetic about debunking that from the beginning, that learning science isn't a thing. As Jim said, it's not an initiative. Um, if you went to the dentist tomorrow and there was a big sign over the door that said, "We're celebrating the year of the tooth," I hope you would go somewhere else because they should be thinking about teeth all the time. And that's my argument, that this is something that is core to what we do in education every single day. And so for every student deserves to have a teacher that understands how learning happens. And every teacher deserves to understand how learning happens because it will help them know how to prioritize the work in a job that can easily feel overwhelming. And every school leader needs to understand how learning happens so they can make the best decisions in service of their whole school communities. And so this is really important work, and it's not something that happens in a year. It's something that happens over time. And I think the biggest challenge we've had is sort of helping people to step back and realize that you need to make small incremental steps all in the same direction, but you can't just make whole scale large sweeping motions and expect large systems to move, because when we think about the dozen districts we're working with so far, and as Jim said, they range in numbers from the smallest having about 4,500 students to the largest having 160,000 students. Any conditions, even as large as the smallest of those, requires long, enduring, gradual work.
So do you find, because I mean, this is my experience with the US, that I mean, it's so different from the UK in many ways. And for example, the teacher's job role and the way they teach like a couple of classes multiple times, rather than, you know, a teacher in the UK might, in a secondary school, might teach 6 or 7 different
Yes.
courses, grade levels, and also often have a pastoral role. Not in American high schools, often the separation between pastoral roles and academics. All these sort of things are different. And then attitudes to PD and sort of mandatory things and unionization and objections to being observed. All these things, you know, some schools of people I've spoken in the US are like, it's just absolutely taboo. Like no one is ever coming into my lesson. It's just never going to happen because it's just, you know, can't be done, and because I don't want to be judged and everything. So there's so many sort of attitudes to all of this, and then you've got, I mean, for me, this is blows my mind. You've got someone like you in a district who's gets this, but then they want to procure some time for training or whatever. They have to ask about 4 dimensions up the chain to someone to sign off on spending some money. The money's there, but they have to, the person who signs it off has no understanding of the actual thing itself. So all of that is complex, isn't it? So how are you going around navigating that? Who are the people that are the change makers? I mean, how do you find the Meg Lees in the districts? Because it seems to me that you need a Meg Lee to unlock it. So are those the people you're targeting, kind of, or do you go more down to the school building level, the teachers? Jim, what do you
I think
think?
it's both. I think it's both. I think, yes, you need people in districts at the leadership level to understand this work. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be really critical in the United States is, yes, we want teachers to rise up and say they want this, and that is so important. But what you also have to realize is that everyone at all levels of the organizations need to understand this work, because the teachers can be asking for it. And Jim and I are clearly seeing that as we go into districts, people are saying, we want more opportunities to learn about this. We want to go deeper in this work. This is what we need. I need to focus on this. Teachers see it right away. So do school-based administrators. So do central administrators when they have time to hear it. Jim, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when I used to sort of perhaps crudely compare the UK to the US by saying, you know, UK is bottom up. And we've seen that with things like Research Ed, that it's by teachers for teachers and it's grassroots and so on and so forth. And by comparison, the US is completely top down, and it's only the sort of decisions that get made at the executive level. I think more recently, our experiences have made me realize that in the US, it's more this kind of meso level in which you have, as you said, Tom, Meg Lees of this, who are in charge with running the professional learning life of a district for every adult in that world. It means that they both have the ear of executive leaders, but they also understand what's going on the ground. And so therein lies a great skill, if you have it, and Meg does, to sort of manage up and set the tone for what's going on in the day to day. When we've seen that done at its best, the evidence of that has been clear to see, because in certain districts, among them some of the biggest ones that we work with, the superintendent has come in and not just, opened an envelope with our names on and read them and then walked away. They've stayed for multi-day, day-long training, which to me is a manifestation of and a symbolism around their commitment to the cause. And when you see that, then you start to see that again cascade down, because it says to the people in the room, this ain't going anywhere anytime soon. There's a great analogy that they use here sometimes, that they call them, Christmas tree districts, because you add an initiative like an ornament, and then you add another ornament, another ornament, and then suddenly it's adorned with so many initiatives that it's, it creaks and falls to the ground. And so the notion that you can present, and I think it's different to just what we've come to know as buy-in. I don't think that's enough. You can't just say to people, well, this seems like it makes intuitive sense, so let's all jump aboard, the learning science bus, and off we go to the promised land. It needs to be that it demonstrates its own value, and you don't have much time to do that. Even if you can capture some of the things we do, especially when you've got the arms folded at the front and you're talking about, let's say, cognitive load, you can max out the cognitive load of everyone in the room on purpose. You can do a quick thought experiment in which they are left floundering because you've given them too many knowledge items to consider. Then you start to see the arms unfold, because people start to realize, oh, this is a thing. This is not just some wishy-washy. This is about what is biologically kind of irrefutable about how our minds work. And then they start to say, well, maybe we ought to pay attention to that. And it's like you're naming something that is so blatantly obvious, but that which has been hiding in plain sight for so long, that you get this moment where people come up to us, and they have done time and time and time again, almost in a sort of accusatory manner, and say, why is no one stuff? Like where
Yeah.
So and that we feel is the thing to capitalize on.
So to be honest with you, I was wondering how this would go, because with the both of you being here and the roles you have, I feel like you could have a whole discussion just about the system implementation side. But actually, when you get that, when you get there, though, you the groovy stuff is the actual material. And one of the things I'm fascinated about with the US is, so even going to a conference like I don't know, learning in the brain, or even some of the policing around the margins of even a research ed in the US, you're thinking not everyone is like a switched on, but definitely even at a conference like learning in the brain, you've got some of the input is still on the sort of dubious side of things, I would say, in terms of the learning science thing. People are excessively, well, I say, let's be careful with words, compared with other places, way more likely to be talking about social and emotional barriers to learning, and therefore social kind of aspects of learning being more of a preoccupation than, say, the cognitive aspect and the sequencing curriculum and so on. To the point where you've got people on a panel, I'm still, it's burnt a hole in my soul, this debate with someone talking about how when you have a debate, you need to find in a class, you need to find out the children's preferred debate style, and whether they're a kind of combative debater or a consensual debater or a compromise seeker. And knowing that was more important than, say, the material, the content of the debate, like climate change or, whatever the causes of, the Civil War over. It's like, And I was saying, I just don't understand that at all. If you're debating climate change, you need to know some facts about climate change and all of that. So to me, that area of that territory is still like way very common and strong in the US. So are you coming up against those things where people are going, "Oh, I don't see teaching in this way"?
I think we do come up against that, Tom. And I think in some ways that's why what Jim and I do is really unique because Learning Science Partners is content and implementation. It's theory and practice. It's the marriage of those two, and it's a dance. So one of the things that people say to us, they'll say, I remember we were speaking at an event and somebody raised their hand. We thought it was a question about content, and they said, can you talk about how you guys present together? Because it seems like it's so seamless that you're finishing each other's sentences. And it's because we both see both sides of that coin. And while Jim has the theoretical real strength and I have the implementation strength, it doesn't mean that we both don't have both. And so this sort of interplay and dance is important. And I think that's also one of the things that sets us apart from other people who are designing or providing or evaluating professional learning is that we're looking at the whole picture. And the two of us together, I love having debates with Jim as we're thinking about how we're going to plan something or how we're going to implement it because it's inherently better when both of us put a lens on it because we do come at it slightly differently. And I'm always thinking, I am so glad I have him as a thought partner because his take on this, and once I see what Jim has lensed, I'm like, it's so much better than if I had done it myself. And I hope it's the same way for him.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that remains to be seen. No, I'm joking. No, I think some of the things that we've been able to sort of thread, and I think this is exactly an example of what Meg is naming, is, and to your question, Tom, it's like it is clear to us that the US for the longest time, as lots of school systems do, have been attracted to shiny objects, and oftentimes the thing that feels like it makes intuitive sense on the surface doesn't necessarily work, or at least unless we scrutinize it with an understanding of evidence, we'll never know whether it works or not. In large part, that's what instructional illusions is about, is sort of lifting that veil. But I also think, as the Americans say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So for instance, we talk about, well, that equity word, which is now even more sort of a bone of contention here, and there's some who are trying to eradicate it altogether. But when you talk about equity, it tends to exist at this 50,000-foot level that says, what are the systems in place that either benefit or disenfranchise students? We talk about instructional equity. In other words, who in the room gets to think? Who in the room gets to think deeply? Even a principle like prior knowledge. If we know that we make sense of and learn new information through reference to what we already know, then if that's the case, then knowledge is a kind of currency. And what happens if a kid walks into a classroom and their currency is not accepted? And I don't just mean like, the curriculum choices and how many dead white males there are on the reading list. I'm talking about specific granular understanding of concepts and whether or not a kid's personal history, familial history, heritage, culture, race, socioeconomic status does or does not ready them for the currency of the learning that's going on in that space. That is a way to talk about justice, fairness, equity,
Yeah.
belonging that doesn't stay just within the confines of those seemingly kind of grand abstract notions, but rather has a way of living and breathing within the details of instruction. That's for us where it lives, because it can't live anywhere else. That's all that classrooms are when we get down to
That's
the
so
nuts.
interesting because I feel like, I mean, it's funny you've just put a name to something which I've been sort of getting quite het up about. I've done a couple of sessions recently where I think I'm not sure if I should calm down a bit because I feel like I'm almost like preaching this, but that word instructional equity, that's kind of what it is. That's a great phrase for it. It's a sense of I'd be talking about inclusion, and
Yeah.
I'm sort of getting frustrated with going to places which preach inclusion at a surface level and will be kind of, very anti any sense of exclusion from behavior, for example. And yet, when you watch the lessons, they are not inclusive classrooms because the children are not being taught. Some are, and a few children dominate and all of that. But they're not, like you said, who gets to do the thinking? That's such a great way of phrasing it. And you think, to me, that is the territory, isn't it now? It's like we can run a room, we can get through a lesson, but is everyone getting taught? And the answer is no. And I think when you show that, so here's an example of a thing I think is sort of like symbolic of a kind of progressive, social orientated type of learning. It's say group work. You watch a collaborative learning task. It's so rare to see those done with a precision needed to ensure every single child is benefiting from it. You see a lot of lazy group work where a couple of children might be getting something out of it, but the others are just present. And then you think it's just not okay. Like, why are we accepting that? It's not okay. Look at those kids. They're not learning anything. And if you got them to do it by themselves or in a pair, maybe it would be way better. So why aren't you doing that? I feel like you need to kind of expose all of that. And like you say, when people realize that it's true, because they maybe experience it, they see to do it. But the opportunity to prove it, to demonstrate it, are quite rare, aren't they? So in your thinking, how do you amplify this awakening, this realization across a whole group of teachers who may be not in the room while you're explaining it? How do you get it so that they hear it from other people, maybe?
I think we're thinking about lots of different ways to get the message out. We're really fortunate that we've had some opportunities in the last couple of months to speak at different conferences and speak at different convenings. And we have some videos that are coming. Jim's books, both Mental Models and Instructional Illusions, coming out this year has been really exciting. And I think we're excited for what's happening in the districts that we're working with. We're ready to kind of crow about that a little bit. We are excited about where Maryland's going, but we have districts in other states that are working with us as well who are doing phenomenal work. I think getting those folks together and coalescing them to start sharing what they're doing is really important.
Yeah, and there's also this notion of like the before and after effect, in a sense. Like we found teachers who, once they start enacting this stuff, are almost able to very quickly, in a kind of aha manner, say, oh yeah, well, I used to do this and now I know better. I can do better and do differently. And it's clear as day to me now how this has both become more effective and more manageable. And here's why. And the moment you can kind of bottle that and you can share that, it would take Nick to look at those specific examples and say, no, I'll walk away from that. I don't. Now, doesn't mean to say there aren't those cynics, but again, it's almost like you can use the science of learning to teach the science of learning, right? That would be sort of like the example, non-example principle. Show me what it used to look like, and now show me what it today looks like and how you see that as being a better bet than before. And so I think, yeah, to Meg's point, it's modeling, it's examples, non-examples, varied examples, narrative structures. Like it's where all of the learning science lives because it's everywhere. So why would you shy away from those principles when you're trying to? It's both and.
Yeah. So do you feel like this is a thing that's sort of training people up to do the training? I don't know if whether you do this. I mean, that meta thing, I think it's interesting you described there because I feel I've sort of, without it being evidence informed directly, but I feel like it just works. And now I feel like I'd love to see it tested. But doing like you just described the cognitive load demo, I feel like doing, say, a think, pair, share, or turn and talk really well with some people in a room. I remember doing this in Frederick when I came, like getting everyone and showing, like, look how I can run the room. So literally everyone's talking. literally all of them without exception. There's no one not talking. They're all talking, and they all have stuff to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And they all know they might be asked to share, so there's an accountability. Compare that to just saying, right, who'd like to suggest an answer? Like doing it in the room makes it sort of visceral, but creating the opportunity for 500,000 teachers to do that. It's like it's
Well,
like
we're at 500,000 students, Tom, not quite 500,000 teachers yet.
sorry. Yeah,
So we're,
okay, enough,
the keyword yet, but what I would say is we are using the science of learning to teach the science of learning. That's really important to Jim and to me. And I think we also have been very deliberate with a lot of the audiences that we work with to sort of take them behind the curtain a little bit and say, what are the facilitative moves that we're doing intentionally that mirror what we want teachers to do in the classroom, but also mirror what we want professional learning leaders or school-based leaders to do with adults? Because we feel like both of those conditions are equally important. We're dealing with human brains and how they learn. And there are so many through lines that are the same that we need to help people explicitly see those and know that we aren't just creating these things to have you do for the fun of it. Everything we are doing is with intention, and it is a model that you can take and use, and here's why we're doing it. And so I think that's the other thing that's unique about what we offer is that we don't just come in and do something. We also come in and say, and here's why and how you just saw us do what we did.
Yeah,
and we do that throughout as well, which is it kind of, as to begin with, I think it catches people a bit off guard because sometimes teachers and facilitators, it's almost like we hold back what's going on inside the black box of our own decision making. And when you lift that lid, people are a bit like, wow, they're and so one of the phrases that I find myself using time and time again, I'll just sort of say, okay, a little bit of transparent facilitation. Notice what we just did there. We introduced an idea, but because cognitive load is limited both in capacity and time, hot on the heels of sharing that idea with you, we invited you to process intentionally by getting you to write down and to turn and talk and share your example. Once we've done that, we're going to get you to engage in an activity where the only way to complete that activity successfully is to show that you had processed and can utilize it. Like literally, it's like the used to have on DVDs, the director's commentary of what and then I thought about using this camera angle and whatever that we have found really benefits. And then at the end, like Meg mentioned it, we were almost torn on this. We were like, does it come across as self-congratulatory or like whatever to say, now all the amazing things we just did over the last 5 hours, let's explore the kind of see what we did there moments. But actually they've proved to be really powerful because they do recognize what we're doing. And it sets a model for them to say, oh, hang on, it's not just the what, but the manner in which I do this as a professional learning lead, that there is more to it than that. And you can ingrain these things both from the positionality of learner and the reason we all went into this in the first place, seeing ourselves as teachers.
I think that's fantastic. And it's so interesting hearing the echoes of what you're doing. Because I mean, today I was the whole day with a group of teachers and a group of leaders and running. And one of the things I feel is also important. It's part of is the kind of pre-mortem sort of thing. Like, so I'm showing you all how to do cold calling, and I've made a total proof case. I've made a case for it, and you seem to be accepting that case, like you agree with it. But let's be realistic. Half of you tomorrow when you go into the lesson will be think, oh, I should be doing that thing, and you're about to do it, and you won't do it. Why not? And we went through this whole thing of what are the key reasons why, and with specifically we say something like cold calling. The three things that come up are always habits. Like it's just so embedded in my practice to do what I did before. So I kind of have this potential to change, but when it comes to it, I just don't make myself do the change. The second one is anxiety about children's anxiety. They just so worried about that, so they just pull back. And the third one is this feeling that these deeper techniques which reach the children more take longer in the short run. So they think I haven't got time for that, so I'll just cut the corner and just ask a couple of kids. And those are the real time things that someone's in their head of thinking, oh no, I won't ask Meg, that would be awkward, or I haven't got time to ask Meg, or I just asked Jim because he always puts his hand up and it's easy, it's that type of thing. So to me, understanding that psychology around change for teachers' practice it's interesting. So, but I'm kind of recognizing that it's okay to have those feelings rather than saying you're doing it wrong. But I feel like that's an interesting thing to explore, like the normal process you have to go through to change your habits.
We also unpack pitfalls, Tom. So as we get deeper into learning with people who may have some understanding of some of the principles that we're going to share, we actually have them think about where can that practice go wrong? Because one of the things that we know is that it's very easy to make broad generalizations about somebody's practices and apply them incorrectly or misunderstand them. And so, yes, they might be simple concepts on the surface, but the nuance is significant. And so allowing people some time to wrestle with how could this be misinterpreted or misunderstood. I love those slippery banana peel moments because it helps people to anticipate where teachers or even leaders might go wrong and how they can help to channel that in a different direction. And that's really what you're talking about as well.
And
Yeah,
Meg is so good at activation as well. Like she calls it activation, which is like saying totally to your point, Tom, of like, you don't want Monday to roll around and there are more reasons not to try it than to try it. And even a simple like quadrant exercise that Meg often leads that says, okay, what are you going to start doing that you haven't yet done to try out? What might you need to retire because now you know better, you can do differently? What can you adjust or tweak that's just a tiny tightening of practice? And then what can you elevate that is already something that you do and you've always suspected worked, you know why? And you then literally get them as part of an exit ticket to say, either I'm going to complete an exit ticket where I write this thing down, or you, and you know, many of us have done this trick, but I think it matters. You know, open an email and write an email to yourself, or better still, copying in a colleague, especially if there's, you know, a forthcoming observation taking place, and say, I'd like you to come and pay attention to X because I'm going to give it a try. And even if it's just that tiny micro shift, that's the bit we try to drive home. We don't expect you to reinvent yourself. In fact, if we did, we wouldn't be doing our job properly. Instead, it's fine grain adjustment. You see that has an outsized effect, which leads to another fine grain adjustment, and you just start to see the snowball get bigger and bigger. So that's our take: high leverage, small intervention, and see it for its own worth.
What's your view of this? Because this is my hunch. Again, I feel like I back myself too strongly, but and some of the things I assert are not based on anything except my experience and hunch. So this is one of them. As what one of the things I mentioned earlier was experiencing the techniques in the training really helps to end up delivering it. But another one is collective action. I sense this as a powerful thing. So if you've got a group of teachers and everyone's saying, yeah, so what are you working on? And well, I'm doing this. Yeah, but I'm doing this. And well, I'm doing this. And I'm doing this. I feel like we get dissipation and lack of fidelity to things and end up a lot of things. But if we're saying that we're all teachers, we all have similar issues. The children are broadly similar. Retrieval practice, attention, whatever. If we all work in a school at a school level, or a team within a school, like the maths department of it, if we all do the same, we can explore it together. We can share the experience of doing it together. We can feel solidarity with each other. We can get some momentum. And that, coupled with a team leader who goes around saying, yeah, come on, let's all do it. Let's do it. Can move practice forward faster than this kind of lust for autonomy and individualism. But then you have to sacrifice yourself to that collective and say, yeah, okay, I'll be part of it, rather than feeling I have to be totally individualistic. So What's your feeling about that? Do you experience that, or do you think, is that an untested thing that needs to be tested?
We do experience it. We talk about it explicitly. We talk about alignment and strategy and incremental shifts. And we talk about the difference between what we call random acts of improvement and strategic acts of improvement. So I mean, in a random acts of improvement scenario, everyone's working on something to get better. And Jim and I are strong believers that as we travel, both in the United States and internationally, 99.9% of the educators we meet want to do the best for kids. They have their hearts in the right place. But if people are all doing different things to try to get better, you really end up with sort of a cornucopia of ideas that are going in a lot of different directions. But if we can kind of align ourselves and become really strategic around a collective language, a common understanding of what things look like so we can support one another, then we can move together. And I think that's one of the things that when we go into a district or talk to district leaders, we think a lot about, how can we make these incremental shifts that make sense for that district's specific conditions and for the experience and expertise of their teachers. And that's really where that evidence-informed model comes in. Like, what's the research say? What do your conditions need? Whether it's at the classroom level, the district level, or something different. And then, what is the capacity of your educators to carry that out? And let's think about that and think about the small shifts that can make a difference.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad that's similar. But you have better names for everything than I do.
No, I don't know about that.
Well,
You need a
far I've read
jazzy name for stuff in the
instructional equity and strategic alignment, and
Yes.
all these things are great, great framings. So you're good at framing these ideas and the whole mental models. But you also, I feel like you're developing this sort of language of system level mental models, and it's
Yes.
very helpful to have those framings.
Mm.
But I'm just getting the nod for when we get to 50 minutes, it's really like time to wrap up because then we could go into another sort of session, and but this is this really, like, for me, the absolute core stuff, because I get a little bit frustrated with initiatives and actions which is fringe, and a few teachers will benefit, like some forms of coaching that are advocated are so like high demand in terms of human capital that hardly anyone will get it because there's not enough people. You think, well, why are we even talking about that? Because almost nobody is going to get that in the school. So why we need a system which can act at scale so that everyone can improve. Otherwise, why are we even having the conversation? And it feels to me like that's in your thinking right from the beginning. Like, it's for everyone. Equity is the driver, and therefore it's every child. Therefore it's every teacher.
Mhm.
And the way you're talking about it sounds like that's the direction of travel. So I'm excited to see how you crack on. You've only been going since January. It's amazing. It's amazing that you're reaching so many people already. It's fantastic. So just to sort of wrap up, what's next for you? And if people are listening, where can they go to find out more about what you're doing?
Well, we've got a website. We're very proud of it. We've been, not as expert as you, Tom, in terms of building a whole, online universe, but you can find us at learningsciencepartners.com. We're always, trying to do as much of this kind of podcast conversations, different conferences and the like, and also putting out kind of different writings and things out into the world. But in terms of contacting us directly, I think that's probably the best first port of call. And then in terms of where we're going next, it sounds glib, but I think that for the first time in forever, there is a ball rolling here in the US, and we hope to both sort of help the momentum of that, but also to sort of ride the crest of that wave, because Lord knows we've been waiting long enough for it to take place, and we feel like we're well positioned to help that movement move.
Amazing. And Meg, I guess you echo the same thing maybe, but
I do. And I think the other thing just is, we're genuinely grateful and excited that the work is something that people are interested in the United States. So please reach out to us, follow us on social media, on our website. There's a place to contact us. We're happy to answer questions. I think you will be able to see both of us at Research Ed in New York City on Saturday, May 2nd, 2026. I'm really excited to get that date out there. It's going to be a wonderful gathering. And to speak about momentum moving forward, that event will be sponsored by New York City Public Schools, and that is a huge move for the United States as well. And so there's a lot of good stuff happening. And if it looks like we're having a good time, it's because we love what we do. And people say that to us in districts. They say, gee, you guys look like you're having fun. And we kind of say, because we are. Like, this is what we love, and we're doing it. I'm so grateful to people like you, Tom, and Emma, and all the experts who have poured their kindness and resource and advice into me over the years, because I wouldn't be here without all of you.
Well, I mean, that's very kind, but I feel like, I'm now in the position where I just bask in the kind of, I just enjoy seeing people that are doing stuff on the front line and having seen you come through the Frederick system and now doing this is just fantastic. So look, thank you so much to both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and people will love this episode, and I'm sure a lot of people will check out your learningsciencepartners.com. And also, Jim, I mean, the books, they keep on coming. I can't keep up with them. And I just a couple of days ago, and I haven't. I'll
hold up the other one just to
mental models, and I've got that somewhere. Yeah, so it's great. Anyway,
they're incredible, Tom. They're all incredible. I just have to brag and say that I believe that I am the only person in the world that has a copy of Instructional Illusions that is personally signed by all 3 authors. And I am so proud of that.
That's very
now,
good.
I had to come to England to get it, but I am so excited about that.
It's the only instance in history in which a signed copy has actually driven down the value of the book as opposed to increasing it. So, yeah.
Well, I doubt that. But look, thank you so much to both of you. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to everyone listening. We've had an amazing run of guests and listening to Jim and Meg there talking about how to get all these ideas. Like, it's interesting, like the last guest we had, Dan Winningham, and it's kind of like the ideas at the level of the cognitive science, but then getting that into classrooms, it's all part of the piece. But thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of the season that's coming up. It's epic, in my opinion. Thanks for listening to Mind the Gap, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.